Okay, class 5 is about depth and imaging techniques, right? So I spoke a little bit before about the 3D sound field. And what's really here about the 3D sound field, or what I really want to get into with the 3D sound field is this. Um, you know, the what we're really trying to do is we're trying to open up the sound of our mix, right? So when we talked about it first, we started talking about how many mixes kind of come in stuck between the speakers. And what we really want to make them do is escape the speakers, okay? And so all of the techniques that we've just talked about in terms of bringing up and enhancing the presence, right, by bringing that low level energy, that may be high frequency energy, up higher, adds more presence and brightness, and now we'll add height to the mix. And if we focus the low end, right, that will allow the frequencies to kind of sink down in the mix. We may need to dip in the low mid-range frequencies. And what that will do is that will actually, allow the low frequency content to kind of be more focused, right? So we'll kind of work with that, yeah, we'll figure that out, John, when we have some downtime. Don't sweat it. Yeah, and the replay will be available, right? So you'll get an email for that, right? So anyway, so that's the basic, thing there. Let's see. Okay, so anyway, kind of got up with some technical issues here. Sorry about that, guys. So, all right. Anyway, so there are many ways that we can go about this, right? One of the ways is to work with work with MS processing, and so what happens is that with audio, right, and we're working with audio, we have our left speaker, right, and we have our right speaker. And when we work with audio, usually we process our audio signals in terms of the left and the right signal, right? So we have our left, we have our right signal. And if the two signals or the two audio paths share the identical content, then we will get this phantom imaging, right? Or this appearance like the signal is between the speakers, perfectly between them, okay? If we have signals that are only on the left and not on the right, then they will appear over here on this side. Signals that are only on the right but not on the left will appear there. And then we have all of the gray area in between. Now, there's some interesting things that you need to know about stereo imaging. One is that when a signal is panned only to one speaker, it will actually get smaller and more focused, right? So if you actually take like any signal, a kick drum, a vocal, and you pan it all the way to the left speaker, it will sound smaller and more focused. As you pan it towards the middle, it'll get fuzzier and bigger, okay? And then as you pan it towards the right and you get all the way in the right speaker, it will get smaller and more focused again. So this is a comb filtering effect, and this is to do with the fact that the right signal also goes into the left ear delayed, and the left signal also goes into the right ear delayed. So they mix, they merge with each other. And this is what allows us to perceive this, but it also changes the shape of it. It gets more focused because the sound is coming from one source, not from two. So that's a really great question, Harold. So now if our listening position is here, right, we got our ears here. If it's coming from here, it's hitting both ears, but there's nothing coming from this side. You follow? If we have it also coming from this side, then we have this signal added to this signal. And then this wrapping around the head, these two signals get added together at different delay times. And that's why you get the fuzziness and the comb filtering, right? Because there's also a frequency response is being skewed there as you go around either side, right? So here, with when it comes from a single element, right, you don't get the comb filtering effect, right? You don't get the delay signal from the other speaker. And if you actually just sit in front of your fresh new pair of focals, take any instrument, right? A vocal, you'll hear it right away, and just pan it right across, you really hear it, yeah? And if you have a surround setup, right, then in a surround setup, what happens is you have your left speaker, you have a center speaker, and then you have a right speaker, right? And so now when you're dealing with the audio from this perspective, right, we have our left, center, right. If you actually work in a surround system, when you pan to the center, if it only is in the center speaker, and then you compare that, you could actually switch it off of the center speaker and just put it equally in the left, right. So you could just put it just to the center or just to the left, right. You will hear the difference extremely different, right? So there is a big difference when something comes from two sound sources versus one. And that's part of what makes speakers sound so unnatural. So when we deal with processing, one of the common techniques is to do mid-side processing. And what that does is it separates out the center information. So in-phase information from the left and right is sent to the center channel. And the out-of-phase information, or information that only exists on the left or predominantly on the left and not on the right, or predominantly on the right and not on the left, we could process that separately. So now when we're processing our center signal and our left-right signal, right? And you'll see it's like left minus right, okay? And so they basically, in MS recording, these are two mono signals, okay? And when they're put back together, right, you're basically taking, the left, right, putting them out of phase, and then mixing the center signal back in. This gives us the ability to adjust gain, right? So let's say that the imaging is very mono in the mix. We can make it more stereo by bringing up the left minus R signal. So we make these guys louder, or we make the center image lower, right? Or maybe it's too wide and the center image isn't solid enough. We're not really feeling the kick drum high enough, or strong enough, and the center imaging isn't strong enough. Then we could bring this up, or bring this left and right imaging down, right? And so that's a very cool thing, because then it also allows us the ability to do any kind of compression, equalization, or processing just to the center channel without affecting the left-right channel, or just to the left-right channel. Maybe we want to open up the size of a mix, right? So a lot of the reverb content is going to exist in the left and right, not in the center. So maybe we really, really open up the mix by doing some compression technology that brings up a lot of presence of the reverb in the high, mid, and high frequencies, maybe, right? That really opens up and spreads out the mix so that the center image stands out more forward and you add more depth to the mix. Does that make sense? Right? So that's like the whole thing there, right? So why don't we have a center speaker for music listening as well? Well, technologically, that never came into being because of the limitations of vinyl disc. They actually did find a way to make a quad vinyl disc, and there was a short period of quad technology, right, where you had 4 speakers, but it never really took off. And the only, there were a couple mediums for it, but the primary one was 4-track analog, right? And so it just really wasn't available. And then when you got to digital technology, believe it or not, it was hard enough for them to make 44.1 16-bit work, on a disc. So if you added in a separate center channel or, surround channels, then you would get far less audio on the same disc, right? Or you have to make it a lower audio quality. So there's always a trade-off somewhere. So does that make sense? So yeah, and then later, when the technology existed in like 1999, 2000, and they came out with DVD audio and SACD, which were surround high resolution CDs. I mean, basically, on a DVD audio, you could get 192 kilohertz 24-bit stereo mix, or you could get 96 kilohertz 5.1 surround mix all the way around, right? 24-bit, right? So you really could get a lot, out of all of that. Right, but it never took off because they never made it backwardly compatible with DVD video players, right? So it didn't work on that end. And then people just didn't want to spend more money on a disc. They didn't want to buy another player. People had surround systems for the television, but it was all mostly Dolby surround early on. And it wasn't until later, as the DVD video technology started to take off and started to go to encoded Dolby surround. And as far as an audio format goes, it's still very compressed audio technology, right? So it never really just kind of worked out. So we don't really have any true surround. We're really just still dealing with stereo. It's sort of crazy, right? I mean, movies have been surround going all the way back, to Fantasia, which is absurd, right? And audio has been stereo for almost its whole existence, right? So it's very interesting, right? The way that that's kind of worked out. So Anyway, there are many ways to work with the imaging. Okay, one is to work with this. The other is to work with early reflections and reverb. Okay, and the early reflections and the reverb help to create a space, right, for our mix, right? So if our mix exists right here, right, between our box, so this is our mix in here, we can actually increase the size of that mix. And one way to do that is by adding early reflections in a very small, subtle way. And what this will do is it will expand out the mix, right, to add some depth. It'll make it kind of come out of the speakers and make you feel like you're in the same room with it, right? And so whenever you get a chance to kind of take any kind of sound and put it in the same space with you, it's going to sound more intimate, right? And it's going to come across better, right, in a lot of different listening environments. So you guys have all heard mixes that just jump out of the speakers. And so no matter what you listen to them on, they just seem to escape the speakers. It's almost like the sound just kind of jumps out of them. And this is a very, very powerful way of doing it. Now, reverb is a little bit trickier because reverb you hear, more or less. Early reflections you feel, and you have to be very careful with them because you can also start to really skew the tonal characteristics of the sound. So you have to be careful about that. They can work for you or against you, okay, in a mastering session. But you can mix in like just a couple percentage points of it, and it'd be really cool. Reverbs are used when something is just way too dry or the end of a mix is clipped, okay? In which case you may be adding reverb at the very end so that it has a natural decay, right? That doesn't sound clipped or cut off, right? So you could use reverb technology, but this can help to really open up or spread the mix. You could also use kind of some exciter technology, right? Aural exciter technology to kind of help spread things out a little bit. So, so that's also, like, another way of dealing with it, right? That's also very cool. And you really have to stay away so much from things like chorusing effects, phase effects, because these things have a tendency to kind of create more problems in the mix than you might necessarily want, right? So, because especially when you get to mono compatibility, okay? And this is really still important in terms of mastering work, because if something gets played through, televisions, right? Even though they all kind of transmit or have two speakers or multiple speakers, if you're coming through a system like that, you're so far away, effectively the signal's mono up. Even like speakers for a computer, right? Or quite often, like if you're not sitting between a pair of speakers, then you're not really getting true stereo. And effectively, if you're on the other side of the room, it's all mono. And so what can happen is that when those left and right signals merge, right? So if you have a left and right, a stereo signal, and those signals merge and there's a phase differential between them, then what happens is you start to get cancellations and mono, right? So mono compatibility is not something that you throw out. It's still a big part of terrestrial radio transmission. So when radio is transmitted out through an antenna, right, unless it's digital transmission, if it's transmitted out, then usually about a mile away from the antenna, the left and right signals merge and they become mono. Not only that, radio stations have these devices called phase chasers, where it interactively in real time tries to correct the phase of the left and right audio signal. So, like a big part of the mastering process is understanding what medium are people going to be listening to it on. How are they going to be listening to it? Are they going to listen on headphones primarily? Are they listening through speakers primarily, in the car, in a club? Is it going to be on television, right? Is it good for radio specifically, right? So these are different things. It's not uncommon, for a hit record to have like 30 or 40 different mastering sessions, right, for one song, for all the different singles that go out on different radio formats, different versions, variations of the songs, club mixes, singles that just go to particular radio stations, promotional discs, the CD mastering, individual singles that are sold on the internet that are converted to MP3. You could kind of go on, right? So there's a lot of stuff there, right, that kind of tags along with that, right? So so that's cool. So you got some things there. So the exciter and imaging plugins, we'll go over. The MS processing is a big part of that, and they've actually taken some of those MS processing type of things is a really cool one by Waves called Center, and it allows you to actually even split out the different frequency areas. So you actually kind of have kind of a basic form, although not exactly, sort of like a multi-band mid-side processor, where you could actually shift higher frequencies more towards the sides, right? Or shift lower frequencies more towards the middle, right? And those are cool ways of opening up the imaging quality, right? And so that's kind of what class 5 is all about, right? So that's going to be on depth and imaging, right? So this is really kind of expanding upon the stuff that we've done in terms of equalization, in terms of compression, in terms of the other basic forms of processing, right? To really kind of knock things out of the park.